Hello and welcome to the International Conference Men's Issues 2021. My name is Chris Votey and I am joined with Vernon Meigs, and I am joined here today with Alan Millard, who is both a teacher and a writer. How are you doing today, Alan?
Very well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been in the effort since the early 80s, as you know, and involved ever since on a daily basis.
So for those who don't know, Alan was a writer back in the 80s. He's been working in the men's movement pretty much before there was a men's movement. So tell us what the world was like when you first started writing.
Well, when I first got involved, it's like a progression of events. As a boy, I often wondered why girls and women were treated special to boys. And when it came into the 60s, 70s, we were starting to have some awareness anyway in society. This is before feminism took place. And the attitude, the rapport between men and women was good, very good. And there was a tendency to be aware of real equality standards, especially with the Vietnam War happening and a lot of young men dying like flies in Vietnam. And also this was combined with a peace, love, brotherly love, hippie movement. And feminism didn't have any kind of a face until after that. And this is when I got involved, is during this time. And then especially I was driven when I seen feminism presenting the misguided propaganda and hatred of men, making the whole rapport and the efforts going south. They ruined it. They commandeered any chance we had for a real equality effort. But my efforts and those of some of the others that I was in association with, especially later, those efforts come prior to feminism. They're not any reaction to feminism to begin with, like chivalry and placing women on a pedestal, which I placed on the front cover of my first book, were the prerequisites, the traditional misandry that got me going in the first place. That kind of covers it as far as what the rapport was to begin with, and then it negatively progressed from that point forward.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. So even before, so as you say, before the feminism took hold and had a face, you were actually going ahead and critiquing the chivalry and the traditionalist aspects of that gynocentrism. Am I right?
Yeah,
so, I mean, one observation I've had about the men's movement is that there's too much focus on the feminism, but kind of overlooking the traditionalist aspects. So can you speak more on that, please?
Yes, I keep advocating and stressing how important it is that we not identify with anti-feminism only. And I keep using the terms traditional misandry and modern misandry, of course, referring to chivalry and the biases that we had prior, as well as to feminism that we have now. But what we have now, in addition, is a hybrid of the two, where women in general, I mean, we're experiencing not only in social realms, but in law and our educational system, a hybrid of the two. There's the past benefits and disadvantages for men and the present. And the combination is horrible. And that's where I'm coming from. And that's the truth. And we see evidence of this truth every day. And so we have to focus on that premise to really be successful as men's equality advocates and for the equality standards of all.
Okay, so I am holding your book right here, and I believe this was the first book you wrote, a very nice, thick book here.
Yes.
And it's called Equality, a Man's Claim, the equality issue from the male perspective and an ethical society's viewpoint. Now, what is this book really about? I mean, those are a lot of fancy words, but can you give us just a summary of what this big book is all about?
Well, in a breakdown, it's to convey the misconceptions, not only the misconceptions of feminism and the narrative that men are bad, they're to blame, it's a very oppressed society for women. It comes from the premise of a misconception to begin with, in that women were ever oppressed. Women would not have been regarded as princesses, to be placed on a pedestal, to go first, to be those saved in tragedies and allow men to be killed or to perish. The Titanic example is a very good one. And war in battles. And if women had been put in, it's kind of interesting because, okay, maybe we don't want women in the combat roles, as some claim, but why not? If we want equality, then those who qualify should be. But I think that would, due to men's disposable status, I think that we'd have less willingness to send people into battle, into war, if women were placed in those positions. But getting along on the description of the book, it basically describes how we have allowed women to be placed above men in status from the way boys are raised. And the way they are raised is they're groomed as part of their boyhood to be men and defined to serve women as a part of that manhood. And what we have done is we've condemned men for their roles that women wanted in the past, because women got liberated. And so men are condemned as their ego, male ego, which women supported in the past, and the male chauvinist claims that the bigotry that applies to men by feminists. And they're actually blaming men for how they were groomed by women, whereas men have never had an existence defined in their own right to begin with. And this is a lot of what I say, the premise of Equality Man's Claim, my first book. And that's why, of course, I have the woman on the pedestal with men serving her at her feet. And I think that depicts the premise upon which our society in relationship to men's equality exists. And we fail to even see that perspective. And once it's presented, ironically, it's not allowed, because feminists and the politically correct know it's the truth. I can share a lot of experiences dealing with this nonsense, and not only society, my groups and demonstrations, but within the college and university environment, not only as a student, but as a professor. Anyway, I think that covers it pretty well. And the fact that women are placed on a pedestal, they can be anything they want, including victims. And men, therefore, as a part of their manhood, are not to complain or be heard.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading your book. I'm embarrassed to admit that I haven't had a chance to read it just yet, but I am looking forward to it. I do love that this guy is wearing pink socks right here, although I'm also pretty sure he's wearing a diaper in this picture, which is a little more telling than I need to know. But you mentioned about women in combat, and a fairly recent story this year, which has been an oncoming thing, is about making women part of the draft. Now, for years, even going back as 1980, groups have been trying to put women in the draft, and they always said, well, they're not on the front line, so they can't be part of the draft. But some time ago, they said that women could be on the front line, but only now is it where we're saying, oh, they should be there. But I remember a few years ago, they tried passing it, and Ted Cruz is like, well, I can't knowingly send my daughters into war. And it's like, well, what about all the mothers who had to send their sons into war? So what are your thoughts about the draft now including women?
I support it, of course. And that's really equality standards. If women don't qualify to be in the front lines in combat, just as many men don't, there's roles for women, it's supportive roles, and they can fit there. But they should not be exempt, of course not. And their requirements that they either register or they're exempt from certain licenses and that sort of thing. It should apply to them as well as men, or not apply to men, and therefore not women. But we need to have equality standards. And another thing I'll say real quickly is I claim equality for men, men's equality, not just men's rights. Equality means everything. It's comprehensive. And that term should be the one used if we are serious, because men's rights are just a small part. Equality means everything, like I said, everything, including their value, how they're raised to be just as valuable to women, girls, and to their status in society. Once that premise is established, that foundation, then that is what is going to be built upon as far as having true equality for men and women.
So, in addition to being a writer, you were also an educator. You were a professor. And I'm wondering what it was like looking at your students. I mean, once upon a time, education actually meant something. Nowadays, it's just an overpriced daycare center. So you must have seen that transition. What was that like for you?
Very disheartening, extremely disheartening. I value knowledge and education. It's very important. The truth and applying to exactly what we're talking about is included. And I've seen a lot of truth disabled, you might say, and disallowed. But as far as the students, they don't care. It's just a degree. They go through the motions. There's an attitude that's like whatever we throw at you, you just regurgitate, and they don't internalize the knowledge, or are they trying to? Engagement is very limited. The ability to apply their knowledge is lacking. And as I mentioned to you before, part of my efforts in men's equality is to get people to think. The rational reasoning process is crucial to our efforts for men's equality, because we value then real knowledge, which is based in truth. I don't consider myself having an opinion. I consider it the truth, knowledge. And it's all based on logic and assuming the very heart of what we need to know and base our efforts and our knowledge on.
So I want to backtrack a bit, and because you mentioned male disposability and how men are just kind of literally tossed out into wars to perish, basically. A lot of people, especially a recent trend I'm seeing, is some kind of trying to provide some biological context to it, as if men were destined to have themselves immolated. I'm talking about like some evolutionary psychology arguments that I've kind of come to notice in recent times. And you know, of course, I don't like that kind of biological predestination kind of idea. I was wondering if you had some kind of thoughts of your own regarding that.
I know exactly what you're referring to, and I've combated it continuously, especially recently, even this last week, in how humans are not destined to only have one of the sexes disposable. And to try to even defend that idea is very obnoxious, and it's only trying to support something that we've continued to have through decades and centuries, and we've got to rise above that. But it is not rooted in biology or genetics. And I have a real problem with people who just go by evolutionary psychology and that whole premise, because humans are the most adaptable species on Earth. And that alone explains how we can accept and practice what's right. And I believe there's ulterior motives in keeping men as disposable. That is the wrong of even entertaining that concept, that idea. And just the premise of equal justice for all is violated by that concept. And we can show, it can be shown that men do not have a predisposition for those ends. But once those values are instilled into manhood, then men will themselves perpetuate that false premise.
Well, I'm on the same exact page as you. I'm also critical of this idea that kind of, it tries to sell the idea to women, oh, we dispose ourselves for you, will you like us better?
Who cares? Who cares? We need to like ourselves for who we are in our own right. Boy, that's another part of all my articles and videos and efforts. I'm glad to hear we're on the same page. I got that from Chris as well. That's great. I feel there's so much I have to offer that's not out there, and that just energizes me more. And I've studied this at the doctoral level and on my own experience and through my own research for the last 5 decades. And believe me, I'm a humble person, but I probably know more about this than anyone in the world. And I really do. And I can help people and the effort. the equality effort. And I just don't feel like I'm getting out there, although I see a lot of my stuff being used without my name attached to it.
Well, and that's why I really wanted you for ICMI, because I do think you have a lot to offer. But I have a question for you along the same lines as Vernon. One thing that I do see a lot within this movement, funny enough, is this defeatist attitude that nothing we do really matters. Talking about men's rights is just that hot air, and nothing's ever going to improve. In fact, things are going to get worse. Now, I'm of the opinion that things are improving. They're small, they're minute, but we're improving. What do you think?
I think there is justification for that sentiment to exist, because over the past about 5 decades, men and a few women, actually, I dedicated my first book, Equality of Man's Claim, to 2 women who helped me. They have been not rewarded. The efforts that have gone into men's equality and men's rights have been unheard. They and not effective at all. So I can understand that, and I've had those feelings of complete some depression and of hopelessness. But I've continued, and it's just that it's so much a part of me, and the truth is knowledge, and finding out more knowledge and more truth and incorporating it. I just can't let it go. It's like so much a part of me. So it's kept me in the game, you might say. And, but it, you know, it's very, very disappointing when you go so many years, decades, without having any effect. And this is the first time I've seen such a major awareness happening, but I still think there's ways that feminists and the misandrists out there will take this away, or could. But the internet has helped a great deal. And I hope that we can at least find a platform or interrelations amongst men, a camaraderie, a collectivism that will continue to perpetuate the real equality efforts that we have now, and the awareness, and increase that. But as I've noticed through the decades, every time there's an effort, not this much, there's always a counter by feminists to squelch them being heard, those people from being heard. Frederick Hayward, gee whiz, Melfet, many that maybe you haven't even heard of, were very prominent in the men's equality effort. But yeah, I think there is hope now. But we need to instill a premise in the mindset of men and even women to convey what we are saying and the information and knowledge in social settings, so it becomes a key topic and awareness when we're interrelating with each other.
So you mentioned we wanted to get women more conscious about this also, but that's a question I've been kind of agonizing over as to how to persuade them in a way that's towards, you know, men's ends. And I don't mean just men's ends, but the ends of equality, and not just more, shall we say, gynocentric ways. And some men's advocates try to, try and persuade some women to care about our issues by making it about women's issues or something like that. So, yeah, do you have any possible answers to how we would effectively persuade these women in a rational, intellectual way?
I do, and I've addressed this as well. Always put men in the same shoes as women in a scenario, and relate to women who have brothers, husbands, boyfriends, fathers, who are experiencing these injustices. I have come across an increased number of those women. And a lot of them also have sons that they're very concerned with, and they can see through their sons' eyes the wrongs and the injustices that are being implemented and imposed upon men. And also, we need to get into the schools and into the raising of our sons and daughters. That's the very key component, the premise of changing this mindset. And equal compassion, equal empathy will start in a child. And this happened before in the past, by the way. There was there was a lot of it, but it existed for a short period of time in the 70s, like I mentioned earlier, about the peace movement and women really caring about men during those times. Short-lived, unfortunately, but yes, I've written about this as well, and it's very vital information, and we can understand the processes taking place that produce prejudice. Just no different than how people are groomed and raised to be prejudiced against race. It's the same thing. If you compare what we're after with men's equality and the bigotry that exists within it, you can see the same with prejudice against blacks of the past. It's identical. And I think we should keep this in mind.
Well, I'm absolutely with you there, that we really need to start changing how we raise our children, because they're the ones who really see everything. There's reports now that less and less males are really participating. Less males are having relationships. Less males are having sex. Even newer generations of men. And why do you think that is? Why do you think men are basically just not wanting to be a part of society anymore?
They are deprived their self-worth. They are told that they're no good, and they're the butt of every joke. I mean, jokes that are very distasteful and even sadistic. We see this quite common in movies and on television programs, sitcoms, and that sort of thing. And and they become popular. And it's because, even popular amongst men, because they accept this destiny, that fate. They are not worthy of women. So a lot of them, I mean, this is the case anyway, but they have to compensate by money. And men have been robbed of money through equal employment opportunity. This is another concept, another aspect that really needs to be looked into, and I covered it as well and continue to, but half of their resources that they've used to even compensate for their lesser value to women have been taken, plus men, when they go through family court, are also depleted in addition to their value taken away by half the resources, which women don't share with men. Okay, but it's forcefully taken through alimony and child support, plus justified by them being deprived their children. Okay, and this adds to their image and what they're experiencing through children. How do you think children who are going to be future women and men, how do you think that self-worth conveys to them? And how is it internalized by those men, potential men, those boys that are being raised in this environment? This is the problem, and how men are being groomed now, how boys are being groomed now to have no value, to even their basic definition now is that they're default girls. Not default, they're actually deformed girls. And so they have to be improved. That is it in a nutshell. And we even see money being given by our government and big organizations, like I mentioned to you, Chris, earlier about the National Fatherhood Initiative. It's to accommodate women if men are going to be adequate men and or fathers, both. But that is the problem that is making it so men have no value in society. We don't want their value to be placed on a servitude to women and others, but their value to be secured in who they are as individuals in their own right.
There's a term that really sticks on my craw that gets thrown around. Women are human beings, men are human doings. Do you think that men should basically be considered beings as well as doings, or neither, or is there a way you?
They are. This is an interesting thing that came up before too. In another conversation I had, men are to be considered beings first, and built upon that premise of their existence, then they are going to be very successful as doers. And so that's combined. Just like women, good women have a premise of character, and then what they do later is based upon that good character. Okay, we need to honor that in both girls and boys, men and women equally. So their characters match, but yet they're still masculine to a sense, and they're still feminine to a sense, to complement each other. And so it's both, but it's more detailed than that. But yes, it's both. But that premise of worth and value as individuals, as people, is necessary as a foundation.
So we're starting to come to a close. We've got time for a couple of more questions. Out of all of the issues that men are facing these days, what do you think is the biggest issue that deserves the most focus?
Oh boy, you would do that. There are so many, Chris, that's a hard one. The basic premise that I guess covers them all is to give, kind of reverts back to our prior conversation, is to give men equal value to women. That covers it. And I hate to relent and say certain things, but the laws and how women's sexuality is used to criminalize and use men is a very top one. But then also how men are cheated out of their children in order to justify taking more money for the mothers. But again, the basic premise is to give men equal value to women. And that applies, of course, to a lot of things. But the way we've treated men unjustly is worse than we are told and stressed to treat animals. We don't treat animals as bad as that. I mean, a dog will remain in better standing than a man. And in fact, I've used a lot of how animals, especially like dogs, are because they're very close to humans, and the house as a part of the family, a family member, a male dog has a lot more consideration than a male human. And that can be, I mean, that's a very potent analogy in comparison.
So you've written books back in the mid '80s, and you've been involved in the men's movement since. Are you? Oh yeah, yeah.
That's my most recent.
Right. Well, first off, how recent was that?
2017, and there's a lot more incorporated into it, showing a lot of recent incidences and the progression of the terrible effects of feminism and the hybrid of feminism and chivalry. And I cover how a lot of the combination comes from religion and tradition, tradcons they're called, and feminists, and how they both are equally negative and misandric against men. But the hybrid has really marked a higher injustice yet. These people, including women, many men who pretend to be for men's rights but want to revert back to the past, are actually very anti-men's equality and will hurt and do hurt the effort. I hope I didn't cut you off or.
No. Basically, I was about to ask, what are you doing today? But it seems like you're already pretty still active and you're still involved.
I am. I head the group Men's Equality on Facebook and several other groups. And then I headed Men and Fathers for Justice. We had demonstrations at the Capitol, and a lot of my knowledge, experience, and effort came through that organization, and it still exists on the internet, but that's all. We don't get together physically anywhere, although it could go that way if we wanted in a future. I taught at several other colleges and universities besides Weber State University as a English writing professor. It's like kind of ironic. It's as you know, the university environment is very liberal, but there are a minority of people who have integrity, and they have more integrity than the average because they are up against a lot of hate by the predominant feminists in our university environment and the administration. And I could relate with some people, and well, including myself. I went through, and people have told me that could be a book of its own, of all the trauma and tribulations that happened in the university environment. But I will say that I was hired by a professor in the English department who could relate to my book, of all things. And that was a big part of why I was hired in the university, Weber State University, to teach.
So you have the men's movement watching you right now. People who really want there to be a physical location, but virtual is what we can do for right now. So you have them, they're your audience right now. What do you want to say to them about what they can do for this movement? What needs to happen for us to move forward?
They need to become educated and understand the very premise and foundation of what is real equality. They need to close their minds to the crap that's being sent to them and indoctrinated upon them through the media, through our educational system, through the television and movie industry. And they need to then, once they become educated, convey that to others, teach others, and incorporate that into their daily lives and help society and men's equality efforts by doing that and taking pride in the fact they are knowledgeable and that they harbor this information and can help society in the process.
All right. Well, I thank you for coming out today and talking to us and being a part of the International Conference for Men's Issues 2021. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over these past few months. You're always great for a conversation. Occasionally, me and Alan just like meet randomly just to have a conversation. So you have a lot to tell us, and I hope that people go out and buy your books because they are a wealth of knowledge. But like we said at the beginning, you've been here before there really was a men's movement. There were people back then doing things, and I don't want to discredit them, but really it was like Paul Elam and his movement that's where we are at right now, that's led to the modern movement. But you were before that. And your insights into what the world was like prior to that to where we're at now. And even then, if anyone had a right to be bitter about anything, it would be you. And yet I get so much hope from you. You know, you really inspire me to continue doing the work that I'm doing.
Thank you, Chris. And it's very nice meeting you, Vernon.
Nice to meet you too.